It's 11 March 2011. Japan has just had its strongest earthquake ever. The ground shakes and buildings crack, but the country survives the shock. However, the real disaster is just starting. Out in the ocean, a giant 40-meter tall wave is racing towards the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. When the huge wall of water hits, it easily goes right over the plant's 5-meter seawalls. This single event starts one of the most dangerous, complex, and expensive engineering problems the world has ever seen. Surprisingly, the earthquake itself did not cause the main problem. The nuclear reactors worked exactly as they should. As soon as the ground began to shake, they safely shut themselves down. The big mistake was in the design of the power plant. When the tsunami flooded the lower levels of the buildings, it put the backup power generators completely underwater. This caused a total blackout across the entire plant. Without power, the control rooms went totally dark. The giant pumps stopped pushing cooling water into the reactors. In the scary hours that followed, the nuclear fuel inside stayed very hot. It made the remaining cooling water boil away into steam. Because it was so hot, the fuel melted right through its thick steel containers. This melting created a huge amount of explosive hydrogen gas. Finally, the gas exploded, blowing the heavy concrete roofs right off the buildings in a huge blast. Right after this happened, the Japanese government faced a true nightmare. The local towns fell into total chaos. As radiation alarms rang and the meltdown got worse, the government made people stay further and further away. First, they cleared a space 3 kilometers wide, then 10, and finally 20 kilometers. Over 100,000 people had to run away. They had to leave their homes, businesses, farms, and lives behind with only a few hours of warning. In just one night, lively beach towns became empty ghost towns. Everything was left completely frozen in time. But a nuclear meltdown is not like a hurricane, a flood, or a fire. The danger from Fukushima was an invisible enemy: radiation. The explosions blasted a huge cloud of dangerous particles high into the sky. The wind blew these unseen particles over the land. They did not just stay in the air, they fell with the rain. They stuck tightly to the dirt, coated the thick forest, and soaked deep into the water underground. This created a deep environmental crisis. You could not see, smell, or feel the danger, but it was locked into the ground. It made the area completely unsafe to live in and changed nature for decades. To save the land, engineers had to make a plan that would take over 40 years to finish. Every single day, about 400 tons of clean mountain water flowed down from the nearby highlands, washing directly into the cracked, highly radioactive basement of the reactor buildings. Down there, the clean water mixed with the melted, highly toxic nuclear fuel. This created hundreds of tons of deadly wastewater every single day. They could not just pick up and move the heavy reactors, and they could not turn off the mountain water. So the engineers came up with a crazy idea. They decided to freeze the dirt around the plant. They designed a massive underground ice wall. It is 1.5 kilometers long and circles the whole disaster area. To build it, engineers brought in heavy drills. They pushed over 1,500 giant steel pipes 30 meters down into the rock. Through these pipes, they pumped a super cold liquid at minus 30 degrees Celsius. Slowly, the dirt around the pipes began to freeze. It grew together until it formed a thick wall of ice. This giant underground ice dam blocked the clean mountain water. It forced the water to flow around the broken reactors and safely out to the sea. This greatly lowered the amount of contaminated water made each day. It was a genius idea, but there is one huge catch. The system needs a huge amount of electrical power to keep the ground frozen. If the power ever stops, the wall will melt, and the water will flood in again. But freezing the ground only fixed part of the problem. There were still hundreds of thousands of tons of contaminated water needed to be captured. This water needed to be cleaned and made safe. To do this, they built a giant chemical filter at the plant. It is called the Advanced Liquid Processing System, or ALPS. ALPS is an amazing piece of engineering. The contaminated water is pumped through a huge maze of giant tanks and filters. Like a tiny net, the system catches and removes 62 different dangerous particles from the water. But even though it is incredibly smart, ALPS hit a hard wall of physics. It could not filter out one specific thing: tritium. Tritium is a radioactive version of hydrogen. Instead of just floating in the water, it actually replaced the regular hydrogen atoms to become part of the water molecules themselves. This makes it impossible to filter out, because you will eventually be trying to filter water out of water. Because they could not remove the tritium, they ran into a huge problem. They ran out of space. The water had to be kept in giant tanks at the plant. Over 10 years, engineers built more than 1,000 huge steel tanks, filling up every empty spot they could find on the land. By 2023, these tanks were holding 1.25 million tons of water. The plant was completely full. There was simply no more rooms to build new tanks. To fix this, they started the final step of this project, putting the water into the ocean. To make sure the water did not just wash back to the beach, engineers dug a huge 1-kilometer-long tunnel deep under the seafloor. This strong concrete tunnel lets the plant pump the treated water far out into the sea. Before it goes out, the treated water is mixed with huge amounts of normal seawater. This makes sure the tritium drops to very safe levels. They will pump this water slowly and carefully into the deep water every day for the next 30 years. The giant ice walls, the massive ALPS filters, and the undersea tunnels are amazing achievements. But the biggest problem with the cleanup is not engineering or physics. It is public trust. From a science point of view, the data shows the ocean release is safe. The top nuclear experts in the world checked the process. They agree that the tiny amount of radiation released is completely harmless. To understand how small it is, the radiation a local person might get from the water over a whole year is 0.81 microsieverts. This is almost nothing compared to the 2,100 microsieverts of normal radiation people already get just by living on Earth. But people do not just look at numbers. For the local fishermen in Fukushima, and for the countries watching nearby, this is terrible news. It has badly hurt the reputation of the local seafood. Buyers and nearby countries had reacted with fears. They stopped buying fish from the area. This has ruined the life of the people who make a living from the sea and caused big fights between countries. The engineering behind Fukushima's cleanup is undoubtedly some of the most impressive, desperate, and scale-defying problem-solving in modern history. But it shows a hard truth. Humans are smart enough to freeze the Earth, filter tiny atoms, and build tunnels under the ocean. But we still struggle to fix the gap between science and fear. When a system breaks this badly, rebuilding the concrete, the steel, and the land is only half the battle. Rebuilding trust takes much longer. Thank you for watching.